Okay, so today we're going to be talking about energy flow in Unit 4.2. So when we met before the break, we were talking about the levels of organization in ecology. So we have our species is the smallest, multiple members of that same species in areas of population, multiple populations of different species interacting as a community, and together these all make your ecosystem. So biology is the study of life, and all living things need to have energy in order to be alive. So 4.2 is all about where that energy comes from initially and how that energy is transferred between organisms. So what you probably already know intuitively is that all energy, for the most part, on Earth starts from the sun. So the sun is the main source for energy in life. It is initially captured by producers. So producers doesn't mean just plants. It also includes other organisms from protista like algae or cyanobacteria, which is another member of the prokaryotic kingdom. So this is what both of them kind of look like here. So all of these are considered producers. And what a producer will do is it's going to capture that energy from sunlight, and by using photosynthesis, convert it into a chemical form of energy. It's going to store it in an organic molecule. And then that will make that energy available for everybody else that comes after. So producers are really important in every kind of food web or food chain. It always starts with them. So once that energy is fixed in glucose, it can then be consumed by those primary consumers, which I think we talked about in 4.1. So your primary consumers are your herbivores. So these are like your insects and your rabbits. They're the first ones to do consuming, because everyone after this does not make their own food. Only the producers will do that. So primary consumers come along, they steal the energy in a chemical form from those producers, and if you guys probably already can pick up that these are prey animals, so they are preyed on by the secondary consumers because they are the second in line to do like the consuming. So these would be like your small carnivores, like maybe the cats or the snakes. But then the list kind of goes on. So after secondary consumers, we have now a tertiary consumer. So that just means they're like 1, 2, 3 in line. And these would be your larger predators like the wolf or the hawk. Now, across each level, there is a transfer of chemical energy that's occurring throughout. So we're all just trading sugar molecules between each level that was originally made by those producers. So there's a couple of different diagrams that you do have to be familiar with. The simplest one is the food chain. And that's sort of like what I just showed you. So food chain is just a single path of energy transfer. So maybe you would have like your corn. Again, the producers are always going to start off here. That's going to go to a primary consumer of the mouse, to a secondary consumer of this owl. This is the smallest one. They might have up to tertiary consumers. So we have primary consumer rabbit, secondary consumer fox, tertiary consumer lion. But they can go up to about 4 different levels. So this would be up to quaternary. And we'll talk about why it sort of stops at this level over here. But remember that the sun is always the main source of energy here, and it's these producers like the corn or the carrot plants or the grass that's initially capturing that energy, converting it into a chemical form for everybody else on the planet to use. So just some important things to note that you probably already know intuitively, but we're going to just explicitly state it. So the arrows point in the direction of energy flow. So in this case, this is saying the energy is moving from the corn, because remember, they're the producers. They're the first ones that are storing that energy in sugar. So the energy is moving from the corn to the mouse that consumes it. So you already know that, because we know that, say, corn doesn't go around and eat a mouse, right? So we know that energy is moving from the corn to the mouse and from the mouse to the owl. So these steps, each one in here has a special name, and that is a trophic level. So trophic level is basically where the eating and feeding is happening. So the producer is its own trophic level. This trophic level of the primary consumers, this grasshopper, that's its own trophic level, and so is this secondary consumer here. So each of these are going to be separate trophic levels. So if I asked you for the trophic level of the tertiary consumer, you would know, okay, who's doing the eating? It's like 1, 2, 3, because tertiary means 3, and that would lead you to the snake. So that's what a trophic level is, if you ever hear that word, right? So I have my producers, my primary consumers, my secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. All right, so that's it for the food chain. Now, the food web are basically multiple food chains. So this is a diagram that's going to show the interaction of a bunch of different food chains, but I can come in here and say find like one food chain. So let's say this one here. So I go from, again, the sun to my producer, this plant here, to the grasshopper, to the spider, to the mouse. That would be one food chain, but again, this is, kind of is in the name, this is a web shape. There's multiple food chains in here, so I could go ahead and find like this other different one, this more complicated one that goes plant, grasshopper, to say weasel, to owl, right? And you still have your trophic levels in here. We still have the trophic level of producer, we still have our primary consumers, our secondary consumers, so these trophic levels are still present. And again, if I were to ask you for a tertiary consumer, you could count like 1, 2, 3 by following these arrows. So that's what those terms mean, right? Okay. The other term that you have to be aware of is the biomass. So you might see these biomass pyramids, and that's basically like the weight of a trophic level in an area. So if I asked you for the biomass of the producers, it would be like if I went out and got all the plants and I weighed them and I added them all together, that would be the total biomass of the producer trophic level. Or if I went out and got all the primary consumers and I say like I weighed all the mice, say I wanted the biomass of mice, I would take each mouse and then weigh it individually, right? So say I wanted the mouse, I get all the mice and I weigh them, that's the biomass of the mice. Or if I wanted the biomass of the total trophic level, maybe I'd go get the crickets too and weigh them all. So that's going to be what biomass is. It's literally the total amount in weight of organisms in an area. So you might see a pyramid like this, and what you probably just noticed from that picture is that biomass decreases as you move up the food pyramid, right? So at the base we have the producers, and their job is hugely important, and that's reflected in their number because we need more of them to support all the life that comes above it. So we know that a mouse is going to eat way more than its own weight in grass over time, so there has to be fewer numbers of these primary consumers, fewer numbers of these herbivores than there are plants. Same for the secondary consumers. So a frog is going to eat more than one mouse or grasshopper in its lifetime. It's probably going to eat a bunch of them. So we already know that there's going to need to be fewer number of frogs. And same as you go up, so from tertiary to quaternary consumers, these organisms, as you move up this biomass pyramid, tend to be smaller and fewer in number as you move up, right? So at the base of these pyramids, you have a large amount of biomass. And then as you go up, the organisms, their number are going to be smaller even if the size of the specific organism goes up. And so the reason for that, we know this intuitively, but why does this occur? And furthermore, why do we stop at quaternary consumers? Like, why is there no 5, 6? Like, can it go to like 10 levels? And the answer is no. So why this happens is because there's an energy loss every time that there is a transfer. So this is a different kind of diagram than the one you just saw. This is an energy pyramid. And what this is showing you is that 90%, and this is a real number, 90% of energy is lost every time that there's a transfer. So say that you're a primary producer, say that you're this plant here, and this plant maybe creates about 10,000 joules. This is what's available in the ecosystem. And then when this plant is eaten by the grasshopper, it doesn't get the 10,000 joules that the plant made. It only gets 1,000. It only gets 10% of what was available. And then same thing when this grasshopper gets eaten by the mouse does not get 1,000 joules that was available in the grasshopper. It only gets 100. And then same thing with this tertiary consumer. By the time it gets to the third level, out of 10,000 joules, there's only 10 that are left. And that is because there is heat or energy loss across each transfer. Only 10% is kept between each transfer, 90% is lost. And so you might be thinking, okay, well, how does that happen? Like, where does that come from? And what I can tell you is that respiration, when we're just breathing, there is heat loss. And then the other thing is that sometimes, say, a cricket dies. Like, I mean, we're looking at an entire ecosystem here, right? And so maybe you have 100 crickets, and the 100 crickets together are worth about 1,000 joules. But sometimes they die in a corner and nobody really sees them, like they're not available to be eaten by the mouse. So that's an energy loss because they died without ever being consumed. The other thing is that energy conversion is never 100%. It's actually like way less efficient than that. So even if you're talking about like a car engine, you're never going to get 100% out, and that's pretty much what's happening in respiration. You're losing some of that energy as heat loss. The other thing is that not all the materials in an animal or a plant are digestible for everything that eats it. So like, say for the hawk, right? The hawk is eating this nice juicy mouse. The problem is that the mouse also has fur and bones which the hawk cannot digest. So it's not going to get the full amount of energy that was put into building the mouse. It only gets, the energy from, say, the protein in the muscle, it gets the meats and the fat, but it can't really use the bones and the fur. So not all the material is digested, so that accounts for some. And what usually happens to that extra material is excreted as waste. So you might see this word egestion, which just means the waste material defecation. So yeah, just a quick note. Energy pyramids are different than biomass pyramids, and you can kind of see that when you're looking at them right now, and I'm pointing that out to you. They have really different shapes. So one of them is measuring like energy, right? So it's got these joule units here. The shape is really different. It's not these triangle pyramid shapes. The base is much like wider, and there's a much bigger jump because, again, 90% is leaving, so you're reducing this by about 10%. So if I ask you for an energy pyramid, don't draw me a biomass pyramid because they're totally different things, right? So this one over here is probably going to represent either the number of animals or the weight. These units are either going to be in the kilograms or, say, number of individuals, and the shape is really different. So, be careful when on the test. If they're asking you for one or the other, make sure you give me the right one. All right, so I promised you about why does it max out at 3 or 4 as far as tertiary or quaternary consumers? Why isn't there some quintary consumer or septary consumer? And the reason has to do with that the amount of energy that is entering this system is fixed. You can only put so much sunlight into a system, like the plants that are down here and cut off. Okay, they can only convert so much energy. There's only so many of them. And again, you can't like increase the amount of sunlight unless you want to like burn the planet, right? So there's that. So energy has to constantly be put in. There's only so much sunlight. On top of that, we lose a lot of energy as heat, right? So if we go back over here, there's not a whole lot of energy left over for this little hawk right here, right? So if there were some other organism above it, like over here, I mean, he would have to eat a whole lot of animals to like support himself. So there's just not a lot left over at the top. So that's why it's sort of limited past that point. Okay, so that is gonna stop there. And yeah, review this as needed. I'll have another review video just after this one.